I want to start with a feeling that I think a lot of us know very well. That feeling of having too many things pulling at us all at once, all at the same time. Too many directions, too many decisions, too many versions of your life, all competing for attention exactly at the same time. And when we're in that place, it doesn't just feel uncomfortable, it feels exhausting. Like you're working incredibly hard and getting absolutely nowhere. So what's actually happening when our mind feels like that? And more importantly, is there something deeper going on beyond just having a lot on your plate? Because I think there is, and understanding it, it basically changed how I work with my own mind completely. In my late 20s, my life felt genuinely all over the place. I was working a full-time job that literally had nothing to do with where I wanted to go. Yet at the same time, I was trying to decide between going back for an MBA or taking that money and starting a business. On top of that, I was recovering from an injury I'd picked up while serving in the Army Reserves. And so there were three completely different poles in my life, three very different demands of my attention, and not one of them pointed in the same direction. The best way I could describe it was that it felt like, I guess you could imagine a rowing team. But instead of everyone rowing together, or one person is pulling hard to the left and another person is pulling hard to the right, and someone else has stopped completely rowing altogether. And that's what my mind felt like inside. A lot of effort, a lot of energy being spent, but very little forward movement. And that's the exhausting part. It wasn't just the circumstances, it was the internal noise, the constant back and forth, the inability to land on a direction and actually feel like I'm moving forward. And I remember thinking at the time that if I could just figure out the right answer, the right path, the right way to go, I'd be just fine. But what I didn't understand yet was the problem wasn't actually the decision, it was the quality of my mind I was trying to make the decision actually from. So let me explain what I mean by that, because this is where I think things get pretty interesting. There's a concept I've been studying for a long time. It's called coherence. And in its simplest form, coherence is what happens when the different parts of a given system start working together as a singular unified whole. Now think about light for a moment, white light. It's all the different frequencies of light mixed together. It scatters in every direction, it's bright, but it's not particularly powerful or focused. Now if you take that same light, align all those frequencies and make them coherent, and you get a laser. Now a laser you can cut through steel, not because you added more light, but because you organized it, and you organized basically what's already there. And here's what I find super fascinating about this. The intensity of a coherent light is just a little stronger than scattered light. It's not just a little bit stronger, it's exponentially stronger, proportionate to the number of light sources squared. So simply by becoming coherent, the same system becomes exponentially more powerful. And I believe our minds work in exactly the same way. A fragmented mind is like white light. Lots of thoughts, lots of energy, pulling in different directions, contradicting each other with no unified direction. And when we're operating from that place, we might be putting in enormous amounts of effort, but the signal, it isn't focused. It's not coherent. So it's not always about trying harder or making a better decision. It's about the quality and coherence of the thinking itself. And the coherence of our thinking, it's not something we can try to force directly. It's something that emerges when the level underneath it starts to settle and starts to become more quiet. Things become a little bit more clear. So back in my late 20s, at some point during that time period, I came across a free resource. It was a free mindfulness course online. It's called the Palouse Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction Course. I'll leave a link in the description, and I wanted to be clear about that, because when you leave something, you want to make sure that you're mentioning that I have absolutely no affiliation with that resource. It's just something that honestly generally helped me when I was starting out, and if it helps even just one person watching this video, I think that's worth mentioning. And so during a time of stress, I started working through it, and I want to be honest about what happened next, because I also think it's important, to understand that the results from that practice, it didn't come overnight. There was no single moment where everything just clicked, no dramatic breakthrough in week one. I think about a meditation practice a lot like compound interest in finance. The benefits they tend to grow over time. Slowly at first, almost imperceptible, and then you look up one day and something is genuinely different in how you view the world. I think most people approach meditation expecting immediate return, and when they don't feel this dramatic difference after a few sessions, because it's tough to sit still, they assume that the meditation isn't working. But that's like checking your investment account after the first week and concluding that compound interest is a myth. The real gains come from consistency over time, from making meditation a practice rather than some sort of experiment and a quick fix. And what I started to notice gradually over weeks and months and eventually years of showing up was that the noise in my thinking, it began to quiet. Not at all at once, but gradually and steadily over time. And so what does that actually look like? What changes when the mind becomes more coherent? For me, the most noticeable shift was in my decision making, where before my thoughts felt like that rowing team analogy that I gave you, that my thoughts were pulling in every direction all at once. They started to move more into alignment. More of my thinking started rowing in the same direction. And when that happens, decisions, they don't feel as heavy as they usually do. I think that's because you're not fighting yourself as much. That mental energy that was being spent and wrapped up in all that internal noise within my head, it started to become more available for actual movement forward, and the outcome started to reflect that. From the quality of my thinking to, of course, the actions that are downstream of my thinking, to the results I was experiencing, and things began to feel more fun, more spontaneous, more effortless. Not always, but not just because life got easier. That's important to say. But because the signal itself got cleaner. And here's why I find the most interesting thing about this. I wasn't forcing better thoughts. I wasn't trying to think my way into clarity. That clarity, it started arising and bubbling up all on its own as the level underneath it basically settled. So the soil was becoming more organized and the seeds were growing out of it. And everything was on the outer side was actually starting to reflect that. Now I want to zoom out for a little bit, because what we're really talking about here goes deeper than just having a quieter mind. Most of us spend our entire lives trying to manage the surface of our thinking, trying to force better decisions, organize the noise from within the noise. But what if the noise itself, it's just a symptom? What if a fragmented mind, it's the problem, but it's not the problem, but a signal. A signal that the deeper level, the level underneath the thinking, is unsettled. And that when that noise and when that level begins to stabilize, the fragmentation that I was talking about earlier with the rowing team, that starts to naturally dissolve. Not because we fixed our thinking, but because we access something deeper that the thinking was actually coming from. This is something that we're going to keep exploring, keep digging into and getting underneath the surface, because once you start to see the full picture of how your inner world is actually structured and how each of those levels of our inner world influences everything above it, it completely changes how you approach not just your minds, not just your thinking or decisions, but honestly, your entire life. So I want to leave you with a question, like I do in most of my videos, to think about a period in your life when your thinking felt the most scattered, the most fragmented, a lot like the rowing team that I mentioned, where your thoughts are going in every direction. And ask yourself, was that a thinking problem? Or maybe, just maybe, was it a signal that something deeper is unsettled? Because in my experience, the mind doesn't become coherent by forcing it into order. It becomes coherent when the level it's growing from starts to find its ground, starts to find that healthy soil. And a coherent mind isn't something you build thought by thought by thought. It's something that emerges when you learn to tend and consistently access what's underneath it.